Knowledge base. This is Zach from Cisco Systems. In today's topic, we'll be discussing how and what are requirements and steps to deploy virtual web security appliance. And these steps are pretty straightforward. We'll go through a deployment flow. Just to summarize the steps will be taking place here. We'll be obtaining a license via email, and that would be coming from the account team or channel partner in the field. And then select the virtual models for use, and that is will be the critical part, depend on the usage and the requirement for capacity planning. Must be done right. There are several models where will be supported. So starting from 000V, this is just for evaluation, not for real production. Then S100V, that would be equivalent to S160s today. Then similarly, S300V is 360, 370, and 660, 670s. The very important point that I want to make across is each model have a very specific memory requirement and a disk requirement and number of cores that must be met. Otherwise, it's going to be a performance issues will be seen. Since this has been staged on and deployed on either the UCS, inside the UCS on ESXi servers, where the host platform have enough resources to provide these virtual appliances. So again, I cannot stress this enough. This is imperative. Then the step would be to download the pristine image from the Cisco portal once it's available, and CCO login will be required. You unzip it. There's 3 files in it, OVF file, disk file, and then reference file. And you deploy this virtual machine through vSpre or vCenter, and we'll run through one example. Then you want to make a copies for cloning, basically. If we want to use same model more than once, then you clone it before you power on the first time. So this is also very critical. Once you power on the virtual machine the first time, every copy made after that will not work properly. So this is also important. Before you power on, after deployment, make a copy or clone. Then configure local time on the appliance just using the command set time. There's nothing new there. Install a license that applies same license to multiple VMs. It's going to be license file that using FTP or SCP, you can drop them into configuration directory on virtual appliance, and then run the system setup wizard to complete the deployment. So with these steps in mind, let's get started. So this is one of my vCenter cluster that I will deploy in here. I have done these steps, so just to show you, I have a license file and I will be deploying S000V. I have downloaded that file and unzipped to a folder. So step 1, 2, 3, and 4 done. Then we are at the deploying VM with the vSpre or vCenter. So I have a vCenter opened. Very first thing you do, want to pick a host and file. Okay. File, deploy OVF template, and that's what we're required. In my case, I have a file downloaded and saved on one of the thumb drives, so we'll point to that. So it's my drive here. If I look at this folder for S000V, this is actually 3 files that I just mentioned. This is my actual disk. If you can see the size of it, that's my OVF, and then 1 KB for MF file. So the type of file that it defaults to here is OVF and OVA for deployment. I'll pick this file, I'll say open. Okay, Let's see here. Okay, VM challenge. Next. So it will give you an option. This is a download size on the disk, and then disk provision will require this much space, 250. Thin provision was this. Next. This is the host name by default, so I'll call it the RTP. That's for testing. And then this is the RTP data center cluster, and should give you the actually error out. So it's a file already existed because I had created one with the RTP testing. Great. So we'll call it lab. That was a good display. So here is an example. So my data store available space is 599.6 gig today. And then this flat disk option, thick provision and thin provision. For my lab box, I will just choose thin provision. These are the interfaces. Historically, we all should be aware. M1, P1, P2, T1, and T2. Next. So here's an option. If I check this box, and as soon as I finish, after deploying it, it's going to power it on. So if you have requirement in your environment to clone this, make sure this option is not checked. That is important. Again, if you're planning to clone it more than one time, otherwise you're going to have to download it again. So don't check this option by default if you want to clone it. It gives you the summary. There's a file it's going to be fetched from, download size on the disk, the name, we call it lab, which folder is going to on the cluster, the host, data store, and the interfaces. So with that, say finish. Once I click finish, it's going to go in and try to deploy that this virtual machine, picking up the disk. This can take a while. So let's see how much timer. It tells us sometime it will give you that the time is 5 minutes, 6 minutes. It could be up to, depend where this is located. So in our case, it's about 7 minutes. So at this point, we'll go ahead and pause this recording. As soon as this is completed, we'll come back and continue. Okay, welcome back. Deployment is completed. As we say, you will get prompted, completed successfully, or if you have any trouble, they will report it as well. On the bottom of the page, you can see the deploy OVF template, target, and then completed. While he was deploying, he gave a percent sign. So that will be what percent was completed and finally was 100%, and who initiated and whatnot. So with that, we'll go ahead and close this out. And here's the reason the first attempt failed. We had a box called RTP already. Anyway, so this is a machine that we just deployed, and before we power on from the vCenter, if you right click to it and hit clone, again on your machine, right click and clone, that will step you through to clone it and make sure you give a different name for next host. It will take a file from this and then clone as many times as we want. There's some other option, but currently cloning will work before you power on. So that's pretty straightforward, nothing huge there. So we'll go back and power on our virtual machine. And let's take a look at a couple of things before we do that. If you do edit setting on the machine itself, yes, once it's open up, it will carve out right resources. So as we said, I'm not sure if I went through or not, but for S00V, it requires 4 gig of memory. So it will carve out automatically 4 gig. If you want to give it more for testing lab purpose, this could be adjusted here. Same thing with the hard disk. It requires 250 gig, and that it takes it, and the network adapter and the CPU otherboard. So you can also add it as well. So these resources can be changed once the machine is power on. That may not allow you to modify it. You have to power back off. Let's say if you add more hardware to it and you want to give more disk space and memory, that's where you come in, power off the machine, edit setting, and modify whichever parameters that requires to change. Disk space, memory, any network adapters, and so on and so forth. CPU, cores, whatnot. So that will cancel out of here, and then we'll go back and we'll say power on. And click on console. So when we're powering on the first time, we will notice it will sit on this screen for a while. I think experience so far with multiple machine, it could be anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, but depend how much resources you have and processes and whatnot, the host system. So don't be alarmed. This is a message you would get. Async OS is starting services. Again, it will go for a few minutes. I think during beta testing we got some feedback as to provide some sort of banner here that will say it is still powering the services, not just sitting in hung state. So give it enough time, and once it comes back after this screen, once it's done, you will see a login prompt. And again, the default is admin and iron port. So just like we do it today on the physical boxes, it will be admin iron port, and have the DHCP enabled. Make sure if the host does not allow DHCP address to pull, then you can assign it statically, but it will try to pull an address via DHCP. That's one. Second is, if you don't allow it, then currently it will come back to 0.0.0. Then you can statically assign it. It will not feed 192.168.42.42 today, but there are some features open for that as well. So while this machine is powering on rather, I'll go ahead and pause the recording one more time. You definitely not worth just looking at the screen. So we'll be back once this machine is powered on. Okay, welcome back again. So machine is being powered on, and welcome back again. The machine has been powered on, and as we see here, we see a login prompt. Let's see if we can log in. Admin and iron port by default, and first thing I want to see is the IP address. So it's pulled 14.1.128.148, and you will get this message on the screen where it says run the setup wizard, as we see it here. Okay, so we'll do that. So going back to the steps, what need to happen next? So we ran through here, we powered it on, then we're going to configure local time and then apply the licenses, or license file rather. So one thing we can do is, since we know the IP address, we can do SSH to that IP. So, and by default it is admin. Let's send it to actually home. Let's take a look at the IP address here. 14.1.128. Yes. Import. So set time, and then let's enter the time here. First is the month, so that's 30, and then the day, and today is 12, actually, not 2, 12, and then year, 2013, okay, and then the time. So here's East Coast 11:30, call it AM, and then commit. Okay, so that doesn't require commit. If you do a date on it, 11:30 GMT. So we'll change the time zone when we do a setup wizard there. So that was the first thing here. Take a look. So we are over here, time zone. Then we'll take the license file and it goes under configuration. So minimize this guy here. So this is my FTP client. So let's log into that box. We said 14. Let's take a look. IP again. 128, 148. Port, click connect. Oh, okay, mistake. Typo, classic, connect. That was not on purpose. Nice. So the directory that the config file that need to go into is called configuration over here, and I have a license file on my desktop. So that license file, I'll simply drop it in the configuration directory. If you see it here, now I dropped it to license.xml file in here. So once this part is done, you can do via FTP. I'm just using Valzella. You can also do SCP as well, and conversely there's another option that can be done. Okay, there was a command added. Cap lock is on. Load license command was added. I can also paste that on my CLI. So here's my license file. Select all, copy, just make sure there's no spaces after that, so that's all good. As you see, it requires a Control D on a blank line after, so do a paste, Control D, and that's your EULA, so you gotta acknowledge, and we'll go over there, read through it. A lot of reading. I'll say yes. Now I have a license. So command is to do show license, that you can do, and that will show this license expiration date, issue date, issue to. There's my license located in RTP. Well, it's just the basic information. Now, after adding the license, if we go back to our steps, the last part is required to run a system setup wizard, right? To do that, let's go over and open a tab here. We'll do HTTPS 14.1, 128, 148. And we want to make sure right IP this time, right? 14. 128, 148. So you get the warning depend on your browser. So go through it. Thinking same default password, which is admin iron port. So first thing I want to do, I want to go into System Administration and Setup Wizard. So all these information, I will leave it as a default. ironportexample.com, that's my host name. You can change it to, actually, won't take it. That was an example. And that was not intentional either. So we'll call it ironport lab demo.com. And then is there another web proxy? Now this is for your upstream proxy, right? Is there another web proxy in your network? Then you can go ahead and add that. Network information, by default, you will pick whatever the IP that pull via DHCP and subnet mask. Just for demo purpose, I will leave it alone. My default gateway, again, it's what I have configured when via DHCP and DNS and IP. Leave the same. Next. If we want to configure WCCP, you can do it here. Default for me is a layer 4 switch, so I can always come back and do that, or you can choose to do it now. Then it's going to require all these credentials. Next. Password. So choose your password wisely. And then I think the other part required is the email address here for alerts. These are the minimum requirement. Auto support is the way for tech support detail and network participation. That's all default as you like. Next. I'll say not now. Then it gives you global policy default, L4 traffic. Just read through it. If any modification need to be made, do it here. The next screen is very, very important. This is your summary page. I like to have the summary page so I can see in one glance what I have, what I don't have as a configure on the box. So at this point, if you hit install this configuration, it will go ahead and install that. It's going to reboot. Once it's reboot, it will come back, and then you can log back in on the box. Okay, we'll give it a moment. Okay, now we are back up and running. So if you want to look at some of the basic stats, system status. If you look at this, is the S00V model running 775093. This is the build date. That's my serial number, and serial number is generated via UUID, which is 1422 RFC, I believe. So it uses the timestamps, local VM platform, hypervisor. There's a lot of combination. It generates, it's 128-bit address. So serial number is generated and once you power on. So at this point, all the other functionality is the same, and happy configuration. Hope this helps. And with that, thank you so much for the time and patience, and we'll see you in another knowledge base. Have a great day. Thank you. Again, this is Zach from Cisco Systems.